Again, thank you everyone for coming. Koyana Dialogy. I'm gonna start off with my own introduction and kind of introducing this webinar, and then we'll go into introductions for all of our panelists, and then we'll go through a round of questions, really conversational style, which I'll explain more, and then we'll close this out with Q&A. So that's kind of the flow of this webinar. My name is Odoch Dathlana. I'm originally from the Yukon River. I live in Dena'ina Lands, also known as Anchorage, Alaska. I'm a community organizer with Native Movement, and you can find us on Facebook. Our website is nativemovement.org. And yeah, this webinar is called Earth Day in a Time of Crisis and Rising Fascism, Alaska Voices on Environmental Justice. And Native Movement wanted to host this webinar as a way to shine light on what is happening in Alaska around oil and gas extraction, particularly on Indigenous lands in Alaska. And even though we're in a global pandemic, the government and business as usual is proceeding in a global pandemic. So we're hoping in this webinar to really just hear from voices on the ground. And I'm really excited to have these panelists here. And I just want to take a moment, though, before we let folks introduce themselves, to acknowledge this time. And I ask everyone to just take a deep breath with me. Inhale through your nose. Exhale through your nose. Usually in Native spaces, we pray before a meeting or a gathering. And I'm not going to pray because everyone prays differently, and I don't know all of our panelists as well. This is a new thing for me to host a webinar. So I wanted to take a moment to remind folks to ground yourself. And I, again, thank everyone for coming. This is hopefully on Facebook Live right now. And I want to give another shout out to Indigenous Environmental Network for also letting us use their live stream on Facebook. Please follow their organization when you get a chance. So with that, I'm going to ask all of the panelists to
Tina, can we just say also, sorry to interrupt, but just so people know, we did turn off the chat. Apologies for those, if anybody was monitoring the chats. We're trying to monitor, people jump in all the time, and so we will be trying to remove racist comments and just really not helpful comments. But if you do have questions, we will have space for question and answer. Thank you.
So with that, the way we're gonna do this panel on the webinar is we'll start with introduction questions, and we'll allow each panelist to go around and introduce yourself and answer, if you would like, some of the questions that I've prompted and to speak to. And then once everyone goes around, we'll do another round of questions. So we'll start with maybe whoever would like to go first, maybe in the Southwest region, with Courtney or Heather, if you feel inclined. The first round of questions will be your Native introduction. Where are you from? You could say your parents or your clan, and whose lands are you on? And then some other questions with the introduction is, what does the relationship to Mother Earth mean to you and to your peoples? What does being in good relationship with our lands mean? And what does Earth Day mean to you, particularly now with so much happening? And then the second part is to name what we're going through in this moment. And that is, what is Mother Earth protection battle that you are facing in your homelands, and how has COVID-19 or the circumstances surrounding COVID-19, such as the Trump administration, moves to fast track permitting, impacting your community or your work as a protector? So that's the first round of questions, and I can repeat those too. I just wanted to put them all out there. So with that, I'll pass it to Courtney. Koyana.
Hi, I'm not even sure if this is working right. It says I'm unmuted. Can you hear me? Do you see me?
Yeah, I hear and see you. You look great. Love your cuss book.
Oh, thanks. No pressure going first here. I'm definitely not a Yupik speaker, but I do know my introduction. So, winga atka baluktaha, churianakamute, alaknagamute, Onika Helen Cardy, Mahaluka Murdy Cardy, Apahaluka Jim Cardy. My name's Courtney Cardy, as you guys know. Alukchuk Beaver is my Yupik name. I'm from Dillingham and Aleknagik. I was raised basically between both communities commuting. Sometimes I lived with my mom, and a lot of the times I lived with my grandparents. I often say that my grandparents raised me. I currently serve as our tribal administrator here in Dillingham. Chug'in Tribal Council is the federally recognized tribe of Dillingham. I'm calling in today from my home here in Dillingham. We're all working remotely due to COVID-19, and I'm happy to be here today. I serve as the tribal administrator. I've been here since 2018 in this capacity, but I did previously serve as a member chief and third chief of our tribal council between 2010 and 2013. Is that good? We're just introducing ourselves now?
Yeah. With your introduction, you reminded me I didn't do my native introduction, so I just want to give our panelists one more moment before your introductions and say mine. Koyana for that. Doh Dathana, Sauza Ina A Christine Edwin, Bauza Ita A Greg Hoffman, Bauza Manil Khadzata Huttan Eslan, Dagai Kak Lesdo. I'm Christina Edwin, and my Danaka name is Doh Dathana, and I'm a community organizer with Native Movement. With that, I'll pass it to Sikanik to introduce herself.
Pakalakifsi, everyone. Welcome. I am Sikanik, and I'll go ahead and do my introduction. Sorry, I stumbled on my words there a little bit. But Uvanga Sikanik Aningaranga Utgagvigni. Akaga Harriet Maupin, Apaga Raymond Maupin, Aka Luga late Lena Simmons Kahakpak, and Apagasi the late Abe Simmons Jr. So my name is Sikanik, and I was born in Utqiagvik, raised between Fairbanks and Anchorage. My parents are Harriet Maupin and Raymond Maupin, and my grandmother is the late Lena Simmons Kahakpak, and my grandfather is the late Abe Simmons Jr. Pausina. I have two little girls, Ukpik and Inupiat, and I work at Native Movement as the Arctic Youth and Community Organizer, and I also help co-found and manage Sovereign Inupiat for a Living Arctic. So, thank you, Koina.
Heather, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Neat. It's wonderful to see you all. Heather Evoy Dewayu.
My name is Heather Evoy, Simshianu Lakshkiik Diptegu. I'm Simshian from the Eagle Clan. Ketchikan Diwa Watku. I'm from Ketchikan, but I live here in Juneau, the traditional lands of Akwaan, Ani, Tlingit people. And that's where I'm coming to you from today. I work for SEAC, Southeast Alaska Conservation Council, and I am the Indigenous Engagement Lead. And I just would like to thank everybody for being here and holding this space today. Awesome.
Okay, so I'm going to open it up as kind of a popcorn style, unless we have any other folks in the panelist queue. I think we just have you three right now. So I'm gonna just put these questions out there, and whichever three of you would like to answer to them, answer them, as briefly as you can, but also share what's from your heart. As I know, all three of you all are working so passionately in your homelands, and that's why we invited you to speak here, is to share what's going on. So kind of for us to get to know you more, and kicking off this week with Earth Day, what does your relationship to Mother Earth mean to you and to your peoples? What does being in good relationship with our lands mean? What does Earth Day mean to you, particularly now with so much happening? And what is the Mother Earth protection battle you're facing in your homelands? How has COVID-19 or the circumstances surrounding COVID-19 impacted your community or your work as a protector?
Hey, are we going just whoever wants to go?
Whoever wants to go. And I hope it's just organic. And if I need to repeat a question, or if you all want to piggyback off each other, or just specifically dive into your thing, yeah.
Okay, I can start. And then the first question was, what is our relationship with Mother Earth? Okay. And then I also forgot to say that I am on the unceded territory of the Lower Tanana Dene people. And the relationship to Earth for my people is everything. And what I mean by that is every single celebration, word in our language, perspective, the way we pray, the way we think has everything to do with the land. And when we set out good intentions, they say even our thoughts are very powerful. So when we put out that we treat the earth with respect, we are able to get abundance back. And what I see today is that growing relation with the land happening again. And not to get too far off track, but when we see colonization and white supremacy, it really takes away that relationship, because when we have relations to our land, we tend to navigate through the world very differently. We don't want to be consumers and take. We have a give and take relationship and a mutual respect, which doesn't serve the current system. And I feel that the rising of our relations really shows with the way we're seeing the shift. Thank you.
If I can second, something Courtney said in her introduction about her grandparents, being second set of grandparents. That was a similar situation for me with my maternal grandparents. And for that, I just, I'm eternally grateful for that, because I think it really helped to instill some of the Indigenous values of balance. Because I think, I didn't really realize it as a kid, but as I got older and I saw more of the way that things are so out of balance in this day and age, and then that helped for me to really reflect on, well, you know, this isn't, you know, the way that my people know. This isn't the way, you know, that we were taught. And I think that really helped, you know, was very pivotal in my life to put me on the path to where I am now. You know, Earth Day, it's kind of funny when, you know, when you think about it, 50 years of Earth Day celebration. I mean, that's just such a colonial thing, because every day, you know, it was Earth Day for our people, in that constant, you know, relationship, you know, and it was just so intertwined with everything, you know, like Signet just said, with our language, you know, with our songs and our dance. It's really a beautiful thing. The more language that I learn and the more connection that I sense to the land. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so I tried to pre-answer the notes so I could have somewhat of a structured script here and don't get too off topic. But I think this is a really important conversation to have, because I think for so many Native people, our relationship with the land is fundamental to our identity. It's, for our people, it's the basis of our way of life. The Nishigak River people are one of the last remaining salmon cultures in the world. We talk about that often in our essential fight against Pebble, which is what we'll be talking about a little bit more in depth later. But we really feel like we need to fight so hard. It's our job as the people who are here today. You know, we all collectively are the survivors of the survivors. Our people have been through so much since the beginning of time, and in recent years, you know, the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic is not far in our history out here in Bristol Bay, especially our tribe. Our community is made of the children who are the descendants of the orphans who survived the pandemic. Our tribal hospital, Kanakanak, was the orphanage where people from children from all around the region, far north, far south, came here and lived as children and then settled this community. And one thing we talk about a lot in our tribe is that we're a multicultural tribe because of that rich heritage that we have, the orphans who survived the pandemic. But one thing that connects us all is our relationship to this land, that has nurtured us since we've been here. And it's our job really to protect it for the future. And that's something we take really seriously. How do we do that? It could be as simple as keeping our yards clean. But really importantly is that we harvest our traditional foods. Of course, in conjunction with modern regulation and being reliable and reporting back on our permitting system, but still holding those traditional values that we've really carried with us through the generations to feed our families today. One thing that I think resonates with me is that Earth Day has always kind of been a special time. Spring is so busy here in Bristol Bay, as I'm sure it is in Alaska Native and Native American communities everywhere. It's our time for preparation for our biggest season, subsistence salmon. Now it's commercial salmon season. It's always very busy, but that's also a time that scares us right now. Last year for Earth Day, our tribe hosted community cleanup with our elementary and high school and middle school. We're not able to do that this year because of COVID, but we're definitely encouraging people to clean up the community and continue to be the good stewards of the land that our people have been since we first came here. Thank you.
So one thing in this intro questions that we can get into now, thank you all for your responses. Our just in response to that, like our relationship as Indigenous peoples, especially in Alaska, is sacred. And yeah, 50 years of Earth Day when we've been here for 10,000s of years is yeah, this is a really important time for us to share that type of deep connection we have with the earth to the globe, as we're in a global climate crisis. And so I want to ask you all, you know, yeah, let's get into the deep part of why we're all on this panel. You know, what Mother Earth protection battle are you facing in your homeland, and how has COVID-19 or the circumstances surrounding COVID-19 impacted your community or your work as a protector? And just because we probably have people from a national place on watching us right now, I just wanted to put out there the Alaska map right here and point to our panelists and where they're at. So Courtney is over here in Dillingham, or yeah, at the end, like, which Nushagak River. So in Bristol Bay, this is Alaska, my hand. That's the Southwest, not the Aleutian Islands, but Dillingham is in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Sikanik is currently in the interior, the heart of Alaska, but is representing the North Slope, this area. And Heather is over here in Southeast. So, and I'm right here in South Central and originally from the interior. But I just wanted to point out that we have a really broad representation, and, you know, Koyana Dialogy, thank you all for coming on here, and for everyone tuning in from around everywhere. And yeah, with that, I'll open the floor again for the responses.
I think we're gonna
Maybe you could just call on people.
yeah, we're gonna have a humble off if you don't do that.
Sikanik, North Slope, you want to start us off?
Yeah. So it's been a wild journey since this has happened. I was actually in Nuiqsut, where my mother is living and where my family is from, my grandmother's side of the family. And while going up there, I just didn't realize how serious this was going to be until I was leaving to Prudhoe Bay. And I drove through on the haul road up to Nuiqsut on the ice roads, and it left me a little speechless. I think that since becoming an organizer and coming into this type of work, I'm becoming undesensitized to the type of industry and pollution and what they've done, and what they, in this big term, but what's happened to our land, and the relationship, to see signs of ConocoPhillips say they had pictures, and the pictures were talking about litter all over the North Slope. There are foxes chasing us. And so what I want to start with is that there's been a lot of destruction on our lands, and it was kind of a jolt back into what's happening. Now, we are currently in a huge, God, I don't even know where to start. Right now, we heavily rely on oil in the North Slope. So there are many, many, many different projects from the Bureau of Land Management that are happening. Now, before the COVID-19 happened, before we were told to stay at home and we had to declare a national emergency, we had the Greater Moose's Tooth 1, Greater Moose's Tooth 2, just really the whole entire North Slope, including the Arctic Refuge, all the way to the Willow Project and the NPRA. Now, it's a little hard. As Sovereign Inupiat for a Living Arctic came up, it was because it was so hard to keep track of all the projects that span across the North Slope. People just couldn't keep up with it, including myself. And recently, since COVID, I'd hoped that these processes would halt so that we could survive, right? We could get through this, but that's been not what's happened. The Bureau of Land Management recently held hearings. They put out the environmental draft impact statement, a supplemental one, after the national emergency had been declared by our administration. And then they proceeded to host virtual meetings throughout the communities. And I'll try not to get too into this because it could take me forever, but the two communities that previously and are directly affected, Inupiat Pass and Utkusuk up north, by this project, were actually not having virtual meetings held specifically for their communities, as in the past they had those held. And why this is alarming is because there is very poor cell reception and internet connection. So attending virtual meetings where you can call in is very hard when you don't have accessibility to these places. So what we're seeing is environmental racism and colonization, almost to the T of what my grandparents and my parents went through. And it's a little scary to see it kind of put into this different way. I guess it's made pretty, but essentially I feel like the government's relationship to Indigenous people and our land and life and our wellness hasn't changed. It's just gotten sneakier. And so I guess that's currently what a lot of my focus has been on, is trying to get people aware and attending these meetings, which we did. We had every comment during those BLM meetings had urged the Bureau of Land Management to stop and halt these processes. And it was a little disturbing how robotic the answers were. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it on to someone else. Thank you.
So yeah, excuse me. I work primarily on, I guess I would say, clean water issues throughout the Inside Passage, with a heavy emphasis on the shared watersheds that Southeast shares with British Columbia, Canada. You know, something something very recent, you know, that we're really going to have to try and pivot on in regards to clean water work. You know, there aren't going to be any cruise ships this year. And, you know, in the past few years since I've been doing this work, I've heard a lot of complaints from folks about air pollution, water pollution and whatnot from cruise ships. And so this is going to be really interesting to see, you know, how, because at the same time there are no cruise ships, that's also a huge economic loss, you know, for a lot of our people, for a lot of our communities. So I think it'll be a really interesting time to sort of pivot and maybe open up some deeper conversations around the issue. You know, something that came up recently, a week or so ago, is that some communities were reaching out to the proper officials to request exemptions for emergency subsistent hunts. And we're not having much luck with that. You know, and I'm seeing all of these rollbacks. You know, we just mentioned, you know, the Trump EPA rollbacks, and on the, you know, local level, they're doing things to help support our restaurant industry, and allowing like alcohol sales, you know, curbside pickup on alcohol sales. And when I think about how easy, you know, it was to get those changes, it just really shows, you know, when you have money and you have a lobbyist behind you, you know, how quickly you can get things changed to your advantage. Whereas we have people who are living in rural parts, you know, down here in Southeast, we don't have ferry service anymore. That's, you know, mismanagement, budget cuts, a number of reasons. Won't go down that rabbit hole. You know, so just limited access to grocery shipments on the barge. And I just, you know, it just really breaks my heart that I think that people are no, I don't want to say people are going to break the law, but, you know, I mean, are being put in a position where you're going to feed your family, you know, you're not going to let your family starve. So, you know, just really like to continue to help support communities in those efforts and things like that during this time.
Thank you for sharing. And Courtney, would you like to go?
Sure. It's interesting to be on this call today because this morning we had tribal consultation with the Federal Subsistence Board about exactly what Heather was just talking about, trying to many tribes. I think Tanana Chiefs called in, Southeast Alaska called in. There are many different organizations and individual tribes from around the state who were calling on the Federal Subsistence Board to work with local communities to process what we call SARs. It's a special action request for the Federal Subsistence Board. That's something our tribe's involved with. Very much so is trying to navigate and work with our hunters and fishermen to understand that we, as part of the collective public, are essential managers of our fish and game resources. And if we work through the public processes, the Alaska Board of Fish, the Alaska Board of Game, and Federal Subsistence Board, we're supposed to be able to affect change. And one thing we really try to work on is codifying traditional practice so that our people are not lawbreakers or criminalized for feeding their families. And so that's something that we're working on this week. It's interesting to hear everyone else from around the state because it's kind of pick a region, pick an agency, pick a project. Which federal agency or government landowner are we trying to work through their process on trying to insert our voices in which project? Out here in Bristol Bay, the biggest one is Pebble. Our tribe serves as a cooperating agency on the Pebble project, meaning that we are able to essentially help draft based on what limited capability we could have or did have, essentially draft and provide review, comments, input on the environmental review document, the environmental impact statement. And unfortunately, it's full steam ahead for Pebble at this point in time. With COVID coming up, or as COVID came up, we were under hot deadline to not only have cooperating agency meetings where we had to review and provide technical and meaningful comments on the environmental impact statement, but also technical comments after the meetings. And we had about 6 weeks to review thousands of pages of documents. And the mine plan is ever changing. What the public saw in the draft environmental impact statement is not the project or the mine imprint that we saw as cooperating agencies in the preliminary final. And so it's unfortunate. Our tribe made the request. Many other cooperating agencies who the majority of them really think that this EIS is a complete failure. Everyone was requesting deadline extensions. Hey, we're all being shut down. We're all learning to work from home. And especially for tribes, we have so much response to do for COVID. We were granted an extension request, albeit after the deadline was passed. But if this project is permitted and the Army Corps and the AECOM is the third-party contractor writing the EIS, they're all solid on their schedules, maintaining the deadline to get a record of decision for this project made by the fall. And that's just, I guess, completely unjust. And if this Pebble permit decision is made by the fall, it'll be the fastest ever large permit decision for a 404 permit in the nation. Usually these permitting processes take 6 to 8 years. One thing the Army Corps says is it's an iterative process. It's always changing. Well, yes, it is always changing, and generally speaking, projects are allowed an adequate timeline for cooperating agencies or the proponent to respond to the changes and make sure that things are done right ahead of time, but that's obviously what's not happening here with Pebble.
Thank you for sharing, Koyana. I don't know how many people are, 90 it says on my Zoom, but I know that folks might be calling in from out of Alaska, so I want to just add some context. The three panelists, Heather, Sikanik, and Courtney, are coming from areas across Alaska, and Alaska is huge. 375 million acres, I think, is the amount of land here. And just for context, the land is broken up into a checkerboard system of management. And Indigenous Peoples of Alaska, there's 229 federally recognized tribes, over 200 rural communities, meaning you can only get there by a small plane or boat or snow machine. Some of our communities that are rural, most of all the rural communities are Indigenous. All of Alaska's Indigenous lands, let me say that first. But most of them have either inadequate or lacking infrastructure for critical services like potable drinking water, running water, utilities. So things like having virtual meetings in places that have lack of access to Wi-Fi. These things have been, close to non-existent before COVID-19, and now that COVID-19 hit and kids need to go online for school, and parents who usually work and their kids go to school now have to help their kid get online when there's limited access to Wi-Fi. So I hope this is painting a picture to our nation right now that Alaska, Indigenous people of Alaska, are under attack with COVID-19. Our communities are super small, and if there is to be this pandemic happening in the community, this means a lot, because when you're in a small community, everybody's family. And even in the hub areas of Alaska, we're all family. We're all in this together, and these processes shouldn't be happening as we're trying to make sure that our elders and our children and everybody is safe right now. And I don't know if you said this, Sikanik, but one thing that's happening in the North Slope that I've learned is Raven Airlines shut down. And that's not just the North Slope, I think it's for the whole state, right? And that Raven Airlines is a corporate plane service in Alaska, and it has provide passenger and cargo services to rural Alaska for how many years? I forget when they started, but that service was shut down while so one of the ways that essential supplies gets to communities is now gone. And so just putting that out there, because I wanted to highlight that for everyone. And if any of our panelists want to answer to that, I'm going to bring up the next set of questions. Though, do we feel good to go to the next round of questions, or do you want to respond to that? Because I'm cool.
There's also a question, sorry, on the in the Q&A. Someone wanted to know a little more about what Pebble is, and I'll remind our panelists, there's actually a lot of people tuning in from outside of Alaska. So if you could give more context, that would be great.
Sure, sorry, this is Courtney, I'll take that. So the Pebble project is a proposed copper, molybdenum, and gold mine at the headwaters of Bristol Bay. So essentially it is proposed to be the largest mine in North America of its size, and it is racked with controversy. The Bristol Bay region is incredibly rich with fish and wildlife resources. At one time, we had one of the largest caribou herds. The Mulchatna herd was over 200,000 individuals in the population size. Now it's down to 13,000. And the EIS for Pebble isn't even using that number. It's using an old number from 2016, which puts the population around 27 or 30,000 caribou. And it's essentially, in that regard, making a decision with faulty data or providing information that is old for a decision to be made with a different set of data that is known to scientists. The headwaters of Bristol Bay, Lake Iliamna, the Koch-Dooley River, Tulare Creek, are some of the richest spawning habitat for salmon in the world. Bristol Bay is known as the last salmon stronghold in the world for Pacific salmon. And this is essentially a proposed mine at the headwaters of Bristol Bay that would potentially have catastrophic failures for fish and wildlife populations in clean water and us people who depend on those resources for our livelihood.
Hey, I just wanted to add on to that, thinking about other people logging on. And this is, as Christina had shown, Alaska, and this is Canada. So the Arctic slope is spanning here. And the Willow Project is over here, the refuge, and then there's about 10 active projects, and we have the largest oil field in North America. And during the BLM hearings, one of the slides had stated there will be, required by law, there is a NEPA analysis, and it said there will be strong probability of negative impacts to subsistence users, large decline in caribou population, large restrictions on current subsistence users for Utkasuk, Nuxet, Aniktuvik Pass, Utqiagvik, and Wainwright. This was the last slide, and BLM stopped us from answering questions. They actually, during the process, and that was a little bit of a long story, but what I want to say is during that testimony, I had said this is a war, war crimes against Indigenous people. You are taking away our food security. And I didn't realize the other things that are happening in the state that I'm hearing today from panelists, and the Pebble I've been following since I was a little kid, seeing the Pebble mine stickers, you know, to not have Pebble. This is it's kind of insane, the type of war that's put against us, until we finally either have to give in, there's enough leaders that have bought into these things, or they just force it onto us with you know, bad information stopping us from answering questions. Thank you.
Koyana Sikanik. Before we, you know, if we want to unpack that question, maybe have some more time to think about it, or talk about your area specifically and some of the extractive issues. I want to allow time for Bernadette, who just joined, to introduce herself. And Bern, we have some questions I'll just read off really briefly to kind of get prompt you. So introduce yourself. Where are you from? Whose lands are you on? What does your relationship to Mother Earth mean to you and to your peoples? And, you know, what does this Earth Day mean to you, particularly now with so much happening? And what is the battle that you are facing in your homelands, Mother Earth protection battle? And how has COVID-19 and the circumstances surrounding COVID-19 impacted your community or your work as a protector? And I could reread those, but I just want to allow you to introduce yourself and answer any of those questions you feel comfortable answering. Masi Cho, Bernadette.
Margaret Horace Oji, Shahan Betty Flit Oji, Gwich'in. So I'm the executive director of the Gwich'in Steering Committee, and our mandate is to protect our calving grounds of the porcupine caribou herd. For over 40,000 years, the Gwich'in have migrated alongside the caribou. And if you look at the migratory route and the Gwich'in communities, they're identical. But we would always fall short from going into the calving grounds, otherwise known to everybody else as the Arctic Refuge, Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. But to us, it's called Gwich'in Gondai Gotlit, the sacred place where life begins. And so, you know, honestly, this has been a 30-year fight. And it's one that I don't, you know, I am one of the spokespersons, but there's many, many people behind the scenes, and there's many people that help. It's been rough because we are up against a very dysfunctional and disrespectful administration. They opened up the calving grounds to oil and gas development in 2017. And they didn't do it legally, you know, when they have to go through Congress, they have to go through the House and Senate. They actually snuck it into a tax rider. And so Murkowski was dead set against this this bill. So what did they do? They put the Arctic Refuge in there, and she flipped her vote. So now we're, you know, we're dealing with BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, who has been extremely disrespectful, dismissive, and just plain rude. So I'm from Fort Yukon, which is 8 miles above the Arctic Circle. And, you know, we have a traditional chief who we honor. And a week prior to the day that we were going to honor our traditional chief, we get an email from the BLM. Oh, well, we're coming on this day. And so the administration told them, well, that's not a good day. We're honoring our traditional chief that day. That it's not good for us. And the feedback was basically, well, too bad, we're coming. So the people that needed to be in that meeting were not in it. And, you know, we have been repeatedly telling them that there's more communities than just Arctic, Veneti, and Fort Yukon. They left out totally, completely our Canadian relatives. They left out Beaver, Circle, Stevens, Chalkitsik, Eagle. Like, I could go on. And so, you know, we're doing that the best that we can. And honestly, with the pandemic, I have my ups and downs. I do feel in my heart that this is Creator having us rest. He's giving Mother Earth time to rest. But with that being said, I do believe that we're going to have a very big fight ahead of us. And that is why he is forcing us to rest. And I just want to remind everybody to please pray for each other. Prayers are very powerful. And, you know, I've been really struggling. I've been really struggling a lot. I struggle with alcohol. I haven't drank since 2014. And it's just like been on my mind so much. And I mean, I just lost my son. So it's just like really hard. But I also am a strong believer in the power of prayer. And I think that is the only thing that has been keeping me sober, focused, and yeah, and my little grandson, my little terrorizer. But yeah, I just I just want to remind everybody to take time with your families, take time to know them again, take time to sit and talk, get rid of all the electronics and that, because that's what we've been doing in our home. And just remember to pray for each other, pray for strangers. We're gonna get through this. We are strong people. I always say we come from strong people, but we are strong people. And that's something that we always got to remember. And that we're stronger together. So right now, today, I just got word that we have another bank that came out and said that they will not fund any Arctic refuge drilling and that's Citibank. And those are one of the banks that we were visiting over the last couple of years. It's a lack of communication, I think. We always think in our minds, they know better, but the truth of the fact is they talk to the corporations, they talk to the brown people and the corporations. And so I had to explain to them that corporations don't have human rights and that corporations are for profit, and that they needed to, I invite them to come up all the time, even the people in the banks. So, I just want to remind everybody to remember to do the work in a good way. I know it's easy to get angry and bitter and those are all natural feelings. But just don't stay there. I'm really, really humbled and honored to work with so many of you. I may not say it, but you guys really do help me. You help me in times that I've never, when I feel really down. And I think during times like right now, call and check. I know I don't answer my phone lots, but even a text, just call and check on everybody. Let them know you love them, that you're there for them. And yeah, just remember to stay strong in prayer. Much love to you all.
Masi Bernadette, it's always good to hear your voice, and yeah, I honor you and see you and love you and hope you are well. And yeah, where were we? I think we were kind of asking our panelists to speak more. If you would like to elaborate for giving context to our outside listeners, our out of Alaska listeners, for more about your homelands and the fight you're at. So I'll open next few minutes up if you want to speak any more to that before I get into our last set of questions. Heather, you want to say anything? Paint more pictures of Southeast, or are we good?
I think that there are so many issues, even before this whole global pandemic, where issues that are, I guess, labeled as environmental issues are really end up in the political sphere, which is, really unfortunate. And I think that now, so more than ever, that is going to happen. And, I think that it's really easy to pay attention to, you know, all of the crazy headlines and everything that's going on. All the while, there is still all of this work that is being pushed through. And so, you know, I think like Bernadette just said, just continuing to take care of ourselves and take care of each other so that we can continue to do the important work that still needs to be done. You know, I think another issue is, you know, we're talking about Pebble Mine, and like I said, I work on clean water and mining issues down here in Southeast. I mean, you know, when this all started, we had a statewide exception for miners, for the mining industry. You know, when everybody started setting their hunker and down orders and whatnot, and it's labeled, you know, an essential business, an essential service. And I think, you know, I'm sure Courtney is having this conversation in her community up there in Dillingham with the upcoming commercial fishing season. I mean, just having a large influx of people coming in from out of town is very worrisome for some of these smaller, more remote rural communities.
And Heather, that if I could jump in there, that was a question actually from one of the people joining, listening in. They had asked, and I was going to wait till the question and answer, but maybe you say it now. They said, I'd like to hear any input as well on fisher people planning to head to Bristol Bay this summer for commercial fishing. If the state opens the fishery, how can we talk about this in a way that supports and protects the local communities? Between Courtney, maybe, I don't know.
Sure, I can try. Well, I can start with what our tribal council has done. Our tribal council and city government, the city of Dillingham and Gwich'in tribal council are working together, sending co-authored letters to the governor's office, basically trying to shut the fishery down, which is pretty unprecedented for us. We are a fishing community. We are a fish people. The commercial fishing industry in Bristol Bay has gone on for, I believe, over 120 years. And so for us to come out and say that we don't want people traveling up here to fish commercially in Bristol Bay was a pretty big deal, and a decision not made lightly by our first chief, Tom Tilden. And I think it's important to understand some of the historical context, but even right now in these contemporary times, the majority of our fishing fleet that come from outside of Bristol Bay come from Washington, Oregon, and California. And those are some of the hardest hit places in the nation right now. And so for thousands, literally thousands of people to come from an area with a very high infection rate to come out to Bristol Bay, where we have, you know, knock on wood, say all the prayers we can, so far no COVID cases, is a huge scare for us. And also, maybe you call it muscle memory, blood memory, but what is just history in the 1918 pandemic to many Americans is part of our tribal identity. And our people, we still have elders alive today whose parents were those orphans. And so this has triggered maybe a lot of historical trauma, PTSD from the past. But basically, we were told last week that the governor is going to issue a public health mandate, especially for fishermen, directed around the fisheries that are coming up, not just here in Bristol Bay, but also the Copper River fishery will open in theory before ours. We have not seen that public health mandate come out. Maybe that will be today. We don't know. But really, if there's going to be fishing, it needs to be done with every single precaution that could happen. The fishing industry, processors, the government are all supposedly working together on those plans and what they may be right now. But for us, we've already put in non-essential travel bans. Our tribe issued a disaster declaration on March 24th, which included a non-essential travel ban through May 1st. Our city then followed with an emergency ordinance. There's a travel permit system to fly into Dillingham now. The Bristol Bay Borough over on the east side of Bristol Bay, that's the tribal communities of Naknek, South Naknek, and King Salmon, have also done the same thing. And if need be, we're gonna have to extend that. You know, we hear the Trump administration talking about opening back up America. Well, it's very important that we don't open up Alaska yet, because even though urban Alaska has been hit and is so far able to manage and mitigate COVID, Bush Alaska is not prepared. Bush Alaska is not ready, and all the preparation efforts that we are doing are still not going to be enough. We have 8 doctors here, 16 beds, and 2 ventilators that serve 7,000 patients already, the 7,000 residents of Bristol Bay. With the incoming fishing industry, that's potentially 10,000 more people that will be here essentially fighting for their lives over the same health resources. We have villages without community health aides. One of the presenters talked earlier about, I actually think it was you, Christina, as the moderator, talking about the dynamics of Bush Alaska and rural Alaskan homes and communities, and that our communities are small and lacking a lot of essential infrastructure that is everyday common life for Americans. And one thing that we talk about often, our tribe participates with the other 229 or whomever calls into a bi-weekly BIA call. And one thing we talk about there is that our homes, although our families are multi-generational, so are our homes. And the housing crisis in Bush, Alaska is something that is really going to be exasperating the COVID infection rate out here. We have families of 12, 13 people living together in a 3-bedroom house, some of whom in extreme conditions have to schedule sleeping sessions because there aren't enough beds. And it is literally impractical to think that people are going to be, yes, we're able to hunker down in our homes right now, but self-isolation is not practical in Bush, Alaska. And those are things that we need to consider. So bringing in 10,000 people for fishing, although the commercial industry is $300 million strong and a cornerstone in our economy out here, it's going to be a huge risk, and a lot of people are taking it very seriously out here in Bristol Bay. But unfortunately, we're dealing with a lot of disrespect from some of the outside fishermen who are ready to come and take their 2-week share of the cash flow that the Bristol Bay fishery provides them and be on their way with really no regard to our people, and that needs to change.
Koyana, Courtney, yeah, I've been highlighting that for people that, you know, in Alaska Native communities, in rural Alaska, there is no such thing as living alone. You know, for my grandma who lives in the village most of the year and then comes and stays with us in the city for part of the year, when she goes home, she doesn't have running water. She has to work with, you know, local people who will help her haul her water, go to the washateria to shower. So it's like, there's no such thing as self-isolating in our villages, in our communities. And when it comes to fishing season, when you're fishing, you're in tight quarters. And yeah, there's a great On the Land podcast with Denali Hodgson, and I want to plug that. And she had a really great podcast about Bristol Bay and commercial fishing. And with that, I want to open the floor for Eugene Paul, our panelist who called in a little late. Eugene, would you like to introduce yourself? Where are you from? Who are you? Where are you calling in from? And what does this Earth Day mean to you, particularly now with so much happening? And what battles are you facing in your homeland? And how is COVID-19 impacting that? And then we'll get to our last set of questions.
Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor to be here talking about Earth Day. And well, first of all, my name is Eugene Paul. I'm from the village of Holy Cross on the Lower Yukon. I'm a tribal chief in my village. I've been a servant for my community for almost 12 years now. Just been enjoying my life and taking care of all of our tribal members. We have a population of 200 here, 200, almost 200 people here in my village. We have about a 700 tribal membership. I've been involved in all different kind of politics, just trying to represent is the best of my abilities to help my people in my village. Also that I also serve on this BLM tribal management that we formed last year. There was about 28 tribes there we are all gathered there in Anchorage. We had to help with charitable trust. Sue helped us organize us there, and we kind of picked all our villages from one end of Alaska to the other end of Alaska, and it was pretty powerful. We had 3 organizations there. We had Canada Chiefs, we had Queric, and ABCP, all nonprofits. We talked about the BLM management plan, of how the federal government's bulldozing ahead with federal land management plans, especially during this this pandemic. So a lot of our tribes are realizing how important right now, as we're a hunker down, and as tribes are really focusing in our important gifts that the Mother Earth gives us, and our basic survival in our communities is goes above and beyond, because all these things that we have to protect it. And we're like I said during our meetings, I always bring up we always are blessed with what we have, and we never take we don't take over what we need. So a lot of our people are blessed with what Mother Earth gives us. And when we sat there at that commission, Bering Sea Tribal Commission, they picked me as the chair. Been serving on this tribal commission for almost a year now. We've been having local we had teleconferences throughout every month that we schedule just to see how all the villages are doing, and talking about the BLM, how they are still forging through, still having Zoom meetings, and all of us in our villages are in our hunker down phase. We don't fly anywhere. We don't want to, because a lot of our elders are population of my village is, most of our elders are we have about 50 of them, and it wouldn't be even a thought in my mind to travel out and try to if I get sick and bring this back to my community. There's no, a lot of our elders are in the the top people that would really get sick through this pandemic. So we told BLM that we wanted to hold off and these mandatory meetings and stuff that we wanted to delay. I sent Chad Pageant a letter a week ago. I was hoping to have we had our Bering Sea Tribal Commission meeting last Monday, and they approved of a letter sent out to Chad Pageant to delay or even postpone some of these meetings that he's having, because we can't really represent clearly of because a lot of these that are going to be happening through this BLM management plan is a lot of our watersheds, a lot of these things that are really hold dear to our communities, that a lot of most of us on the Yukon are fishing communities, and then on the coast side, a lot of communities are on the land, and they migrate, with the caribou, and even the Nome region, Queric, they have the river there, and they have a lot of fish coming in there. So there's a lot of different avenues that that will really affect their communities there. And also down in ABCP, they have the custom crim, and a lot of the villages there have fish camps, and they really depend on the resources that are given to them. So a lot of those things we really talked about when we're sitting there together. And so just trying to do it right. And I like hearing from, different parts of Alaska. So it's really uplifting. So thank you.
That's it, Eugene. Just for folks who are calling in from, the national and Alaska, I just want to unpack some of what you said real quick, Eugene. So for the Western Interior Management Plan, that's a plan by Bureau of Land Management that would affect, for folks listening in who don't know who COERC and TCC and AVCPR, those are Native health associations across Western Alaska, Northwestern Alaska, and this management plan would affect all these watersheds that he had mentioned. And for folks who don't know who Chad Padgett is, it's the Alaska Director of Bureau of Land Management. So just wanted to say that. Thank you for tuning in to all the panelists. Again, we just went through all of our introduction and grounding and, the introduction questions, our first set of questions. And so we only have about 40 minutes left. And for this last 40 minutes, I'm going to pose our last set of questions, and then each panelist will have a few minutes to touch on your answers. And then I don't want to give you a time limit, but I do want to say, there's like 4 or 5 of you and only 40 minutes. And then we want to open it to Q&A to our audience, which I think the Q&A from audience members will be in the panelist Zoom chat for just technical transparency there. So with that, our last set of questions is, how can we be visionary in a time of global pandemic, economic collapse, and climate crisis? What is your vision about the ways we change from our relationships to the land, to each other, or to the governance and systems? What is your vision of the steps needed for change at this time? And how can people support your work or your issue? Please don't forget to include ways people can help, like legislative or decision maker calls, petitions, volunteer time, donations. So that's the last set of questions. Do we want to start with the north or southwest? Courtney, you're ready?
Sure.
Okay.
Only because I don't think I'm very visionary. But it really is hard for me to kind of have the forward visioning. Myself, I'm so caught up in all the day-to-day work of, not only raising my family, I have 3 young children, but working for our tribe and our people. But with that said, I think we need to, I understand that we do need to change. There's much for us to change, but I think, at least from my perspective, the way we do that is to reconnect with our past. I think it's really important to look at our history and understand our true history more, and really recognize and try to learn from a lot of the battles that our elders had fought before we came into these leadership positions. I think if we look for the past and our ancestors to guide us into the future based on our traditional values, I think that's really important and will help us build better tomorrows. We can all do that in our own way by spending more time outdoors, starting a small garden, trying to re-engage in traditionally harvesting and processing food. Maybe you don't have the ability to go out and fish, but maybe your gifted fish, and so you can learn to appreciate those connections, and really work with what you have to try to, I guess, take little small steps as individuals that could make the world a better place together. And then ways for people to, I guess, support some of the issues that I brought up for our region, fishing and Pebble specifically, is to work with your legislators, make sure that they know your opinion as to what's going on in terms of development projects in your region. But especially for Pebble, for us, we take a lot of, I guess, our example, or we follow suit from United Tribes of Bristol Bay. They are our essentially anti-mining governance unit. United Tribes of Bristol Bay is a consortium of, I believe, 17 federally recognized tribes in Bristol Bay that advocate for protecting our traditional way of life and essentially fighting the Pebble Mine and other large-scale mineral development projects like it. So you could follow UTBB's work online, join the listservs, but really also take time to educate yourselves and understand these projects to the best of your ability. Thank you.
Koyana, maybe Heather in the southeast.
Yeah, I wasn't sure of the flow of things. I didn't want to step on anybody's toes, sorry. You know, I think something that has been really incredibly helpful for me is I've been blessed to be part of multiple networks, Native movement included, some here a little bit more locally in Juneau, and it's been really incredible for us to continue to show up for each other and check on each other. And I guess essentially, you know, I mean, I was on a Zoom meeting the other day and there were probably, I think, 25 of us participants, and we were all crying. We were all sharing in like this collective grief. And I think, you know, when I think about when we talk about, you know, the Spanish flu pandemic, you know, a century ago, I think of how fortunate it, and I'm a person who doesn't really embrace technology, you know, but I think how fortunate we are that I'm able to continue, you know, our language studies, to continue, you know, song and dance. And I think Bernadette said it earlier in that, you know, she feels that there's like kind of this resting period, so that we can be strong, because things are going to have to change, you know, after this. And so I think it's really incredible to have the amazing networks that we have, you know, for each other in particular in our Indigenous community in Alaska. And, you know, really just as far as being visionary, I think nobody, you know, this is such unprecedented times that nobody really has the answers or the solutions. And so I think just continuing to be open for dialogue, you know, being willing to pivot, and just, you know, doing what we can to take care of ourselves and our communities so that we can stay strong. I know I said this before, but continue to do the important work, you know, that needs to happen right now. And I'm trying to think, what was the last part? How can people support our work? You know, so at SIAC in particular, we're using this time to try and spend a little time revamping our website and taking a little more advantage of our social media accounts. So, you know, following SIAC.org is our website and has links to all of our social media accounts. We've got some great videos to watch that go a little more in depth on some of the issues. Down here in Southeast, you know, like I said, I mostly just talked about water quality issues, but pretty much all of last year, SIAC was fighting the exemptions to the Road This Rule, which would allow opening of the Tongass to logging, large-scale old growth logging, which is something that you know, we've come a long way since that was something. A major part of our economy here in the Southeast. And so Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, having a little bit of a brain fart. I'm gonna pass the mic.
Thank you. Let's go to Eugene. Would you share, I'll just reiterate the questions. How can we be visionary in a time of global pandemic, economic collapse, and climate crisis? What is your vision about the ways we change from our relationships to the land or to each other or to governance and systems? What is your vision of the steps needed for change at this time? How can people support your work or your issue, and include some examples?
So yeah, we like I said, that we still we're still doing the Zoom meetings and teleconferences with our villages throughout ABCP and Queric and Canada Chiefs. We picked executive board members that sit on these different organizations that we all, try to check on one another at least a month, or within a few weeks at a time. We'll have a teleconference and see how they're doing. And some of the things that are really impacting us through these hard times is that we're still, getting pressured to still have to comment and work on some of these issues that are the BLM still forcing us to do. It's just that we have to really take care of each other. And, like how Bernadette said, that, Mother Earth probably need this break of time. And I was reading one of the magazines that they were talking about how, this pandemic hit us, and how we had to slow down the economy and all these things of fossil fuel. And the gas prices dropped out of, they're $1 something a gallon now. That, most of these things that are really slowing down is really helping, plant life and stuff. And, when we did talk about, our communities, we're really focusing on our people and our villages to, we do gardening definitely through the summer, but, we're asking our people to really look at, how could we do more? How could we use what we have here to sustain ourselves? That if we, it's like how the airlines are not flying anymore in our community. We only have one airlines that are flying once a day, or, once, maybe 2 times a week. They'll be able to fly some goods here in our community. But, as we are, all faced with this thing, we're all, we have each other, and it really helps a lot. So I guess that would be some of my visionary, that we help each other. So it's a great feeling that, we're all tight knit communities, and really enjoy that. So, and thank you.
Sikanik, I think you're the last one, as I think Bernadette hopped off.
Hey, excuse me, my kids are getting restless, and my 2 puppies want to go outside. So hopefully they'll be a little quiet. But I think being visionary right now is really what I'm holding on to. There's just, as everyone's saying here, it's just been so hard, just in general, having being on lockdown, but then also everything else that's happening in the government and these agencies taking advantage of our people during this time. And what I'm holding on to is that we are forced to slow down. But I don't think just that. Before this happened, my vision was that my community would breathe clean air. And an elder had told me, it's not if you're going to get cancer, it's when. And that really hit me. And to think that my kids can go and visit their village or move back there without fear of getting cancer or asthma or all of these really serious issues. That's my vision. And that is something I honestly felt was very optimistic before this pandemic. And since this pandemic, this is the first time the oil fields up north have been, had so many people pull out. You know, ConocoPhillips, BP, we were about to have a very scary deal with Hillcorp, and that may fall through. So I'm really holding on to the fact that this is really bringing forward things that we were told for so long were impossible, were too optimistic, and I think that they are absolutely possible. And of course, this is a very scary time thinking about our elders and our people that are most at risk. And but I also think about, and I think someone else had mentioned this, is that we are, you know, our ancestors' wildest dreams, and we are given a time of a change in consciousness, and the entire globe is on this change. And Alaska is so big, but we're seeing this similarity throughout the whole region. But we're also, you know, traveling. I see this with people, with Indigenous people in Brazil, in Mexico, in Greenland. We are all fighting for our lands, and we are coming together, especially with the technology we have today. We're seeing that it's not just us, and that is exciting. So that is what I envision, is that we can go and hunt our caribou, and what can we do to make that happen is you know, visiting these places, these networks like Native Movement, United Tribes of Bristol Bay, and these places that put in so much time and effort to take this information and make it digestible, and be aware of actions coming up, or you know, which legislators to contact. And I think that, you know, taking this time for your mental health, to get to know your kids, is really the long-term medicine that we need. And getting to know yourself and being okay in the silence, because if we get back to hunting and being in these traditional ways, we have to be in a lot of silence, and that's not something at least for me personally, I wasn't used to, and it was really hard for me to be in my own brain. So I think that's what this time is, not having to distract ourselves with a lot of the stuff that's thrown at us. So, Toina.
With that, thank you all for getting on a screen and joining us digitally when it is important to shut our screens off and really connect with ourselves and be present in the moment with our families and with the earth. And so for our last bit of this webinar, I'm going to ask you some questions from people tuning in. Someone asked from DC, if folks, meaning the panelists, can you share your reactions to the controversy over whether the $8 billion in funds earmarked for, quote, tribal governments should go to Alaska Native corporations? In connection to that, how can the next stimulus package better support your Alaska Native communities? So I'll just put that out there. For folks tuning in who may not know, there's Alaska Native corporations and tribal governments in Alaska. They are not the same, but the government is currently acknowledges them as the same. So
I can start us off with that question. So I'm a shareholder for Arctic Slope Regional Corporation, and they are the largest of the ANCSA, but not just that, they're the largest privately owned corporation in Alaska. And I think that really speaks to terms of our, I don't want to say this in a negative way, but our values are very much based in monetary wealth. And my attendance at many shareholder meetings, annual shareholder meetings, talking to board members, when shareholders time and time again ask for services like our kids in foster care, our suicide epidemic, our addiction with drugs and alcohol that are ravishing our families, which we have very short-term fixes, like kicking people out of our villages, but these are some of our own community members, giving foster care kids or kids in foster care, taking their dividends and putting it into a little bank so when they're 18 they can get $20,000, which for a lot of people may know isn't the best thing. And the point of this is we've been told every single time they are not a tribal government. They do not serve in those communities. They have some services like scholarships and such, but other than that, their top priority is to get dividends to shareholders. This has been years and years we have been told this, and it has been ingrained that we shouldn't even bring up these questions. They're almost a waste of time. So it's almost, to me, I have to almost laugh at how ridiculous it is that at least the corporation that I'm enrolled in would even try to say that they're a tribal government, because these are essential services that we are seeing are much needed right now. And we have heard silence from our corporation, at least in terms of any help. And they have cut off scholarships and many of the services that were helping our people during COVID. So I'll just go ahead and end with that. I do not believe that they're tribal governments, and I believe it is appalling that some of them are getting funding. Thank you.
Anyone else? And also panelists, I'll read the questions from the audience, but you can also see it in our panelist Zoom chat if you can pull that up too and would like to read it. Yeah, anybody else would like to speak to the 8 billion in funds embarked to quote tribal governments, but going to ANCs?
This is Courtney. I'm not sure it's much of an opinion. I think irregardless of the controversy, the law is clear. The Indian Self-Determined Education Assistance Act calls for, or I should say recognizes, Alaska Native corporations. And that is the legislation that the CARES Act funds are tied directly to, and that's why the corporations are essentially getting a slice of the pie. Whether or not we agree with that, that is not really, I guess that's not, we can all agree or disagree, or everyone gets to have a little bit of both maybe. And I think different regions are handling those funds in different ways, trying to be responsive to their communities or not. But the legislation is very clear that they were eligible for those funds because it's tied to who is eligible for essentially appropriations based on the 1975 Indian Self-Determined Education Assistance Act.
Maybe I'll just read the next 2 questions to put them out there, and then whoever wants to respond, just the floor is open. When we're asked to participate in the accepted channels for things like the Willow Creek Project or elections for that matter, when it's so obviously tilted out of our favor and meant to disenfranchise people while providing the necessary bare minimum of public input, is it still worth doing, or is it best to participate to point out the inadequacy of said channels for public participation? And so that was one of the questions. And the next one, just for sake of time, I just want to read it out loud. Similar to Earth Justice's question, I was on the call with Bureau of Land Management, and something I've been thinking about is disentangling Native representation as a participation in fascist structures from decolonization, specifically with the creation of Native corporations as creations of the colonizing state and with the uplifting of people like Tara Sweeney or Rose Dunleavy as examples of justice while they participate in opening lands to development, push through oil projects against local outcry, and revoke land rights to groups like the Mashpee Wampanoag. How do we relate to people or corporations that participate in the destruction of the communities they are asked to represent for personal benefit in a capitalist, imperialist system? That was a mouthful, but I wanted to read it out loud because it's important. And Alaska Natives, we're diverse and we're all over, and we need to bring these issues to the surface.
This is Courtney. I think I'll take a stab at the first one, and I guess just try to answer about Pebble and the Pebble project, and trying to essentially insert our voices into what has been a very flawed, if not facade, process. It's absolutely important and crucial. I'm sorry, I have a child doing dishes. Haley, please, for a minute. It's absolutely important that we make sure to get on the record, even though the cards are stacked against us, and point out the inadequacies and voice the concern and demonstrate the injustice, because if we don't, then it's not on the record at all. And the only thing that they have is a record that says, oh, nobody objected. So even though I know one thing we talk about a lot in the Bristol Bay region is comment fatigue. We have all these different public processes that we really do our best to stay educated and alert and active in, but it is exhausting. And so trying to find ways, I guess, to maintain that self-care so that we can stay engaged is important. But I think we definitely have to make sure to get on the record and create the record ourselves with our testimony.
Sorry, you know, just to kind of, you know, second what Courtney just said, I had an incident this past fall around one of the hearings about the roadless rule that I mentioned earlier, and my mom came with me, and she doesn't usually go to hearings and, like, you know, give public testimony or things like that, and she sat through about half of the hearing, and she had to get up and leave because she was crying. And like, it was really interesting for, like, I have a different sense of trauma related to, you know, this process and that type of experience than somebody from an older generation, my mom's generation, does. And so I just think, you know, I mean, if you are capable, if you have the ability, you know, and if you feel comfortable, I think that it is so important to get yourself out there, to make public comments, to get yourself on the record, because there are a lot of people out there who have really important things to say, but you know, the whole process and experience is too traumatizing for them to participate. So
Yeah, I think I would just say the same thing, that it's really important, and attending so many meetings can be really exhausting, but just contributing to that at the end of the day, when we have 50,000 comments that say we don't want this project, it is really powerful. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Thank you. And I was just looking at the second question here. I think that's a really interesting question, just because of how involved I've kind of, or how much I've followed Tara Sweeney specifically, but just the representation girls. That there was a picture I once saw. It was a cartoon or you know, like a very simple animated drawing, and at the top it said oil Eskimos, and you know, you kind of see it's supposed to be funny, and it was kind of, it made me sad, and it hit me in a very different way once I started organizing, because that is essentially how people see us. Inupiat of the North Slope is that we are millionaires that are driving $70,000 vehicles, and we could care less about the earth. And it is hard when we have representatives in DC that are the only ones that can afford to go out there, such as the Arctic Slope Regional Corporation, and they say they represent all Inupiat people, even though many of the times we're being silenced, we're being pressured, we're being cut off from essential resources and contracts and jobs if we speak out against them. And so I hope, as I've become aware, because I've personally had to experience so many times where we are misrepresented, where we have people such as Tara Sweeney, who worked for 10 years lobbying for oil and gas to open the Arctic Refuge and made over $1 million on record each year getting those. She worked for Arctic Slope Regional Corporation directly before accepting her position to represent, you know, Alaska Natives and Native Americans in our land, in our resources, in our protection, in our essential services. She has had a lot of conflict of interest within those contracts and just business in general, but she's also been a big proponent in representation of Inupiat people in the place where the decisions are made. And so when I look at places like Brazil, who have I think it's called Red Sky or something like that. If you visit their site, it sounds really pretty. It says, we are here to mitigate between the indigenous people and the extraction industry. We want to ensure that there's a positive relationship. And I mean, it just sounds great until you meet the indigenous people of Brazil that say that they're one of the most evil places that, or companies and people they've ever met, and they have actually taken away tons from them. But outside in the world, they represent as being this advocate and you know, ally of indigenous people in Brazil. So I hope anyone that's watching, when you see the representation on TV or anywhere, question it, thoroughly look at who is being represented, and the disproportionate or where is the equity of representation, and then start asking local people that really live there, that are the least benefited from some of these extractive industries. Thank you.
Before we close out, we have one more question from the audience. So wait, where'd it go? Oh yeah. How do we envision a decolonized land management system, and what does it look like to you?
I think that's something that I do try to see a lot, especially in regards to our fights for subsistence rights and advocating for changes and regulations that allow people to harvest traditionally and provide for their families nutritional needs when they need it. A decolonized land management system would mean that we don't have to navigate through the Alaska Board of Fish, the Alaska Board of Game, the Federal Subsistence Board, the local advisory councils and committees for all three of those, plus our co-management authorities. Like here we have our YKC Bird Council, Kayasik Walrus Commission, the Bristol Bay Marine Mammal Council. In order to be a truly educated harvester, to understand all of the different laws for each species in each land management unit, could essentially become someone's entire career. We need to be able to see and celebrate a day where our people can feed themselves, no matter which side of the river they're on, with whatever methods and means they're on, they have available to them. And so I guess getting back to true food security for our tribal communities is what I see in that vision.
Anybody else would like to go? I have a personal comment though, and it's one that is carried, I think, across Indigenous nations, is that we're tired of being asked to have to be a token seat at the table. We set the dang table, we can reconstruct the table, and we set the menu. You know, as people who have been harvesting on these lands for 10,000s of years, it is disrespectful to think that these government systems set the parameters for which we manage our lands. When we've been the true stewards for this long, we should be the ones to say how these processes should be built out. And, you know, more than just, oh, can you get in this meeting and can you watch it and stuff, we should be setting the standards and the processes. And that's just one of my personal views on that. And I'd like to give a couple more minutes for anyone else to say anything before I close this out with closing words.
Thanks for that, Christina. You know, I think, at least, you know, in my circle, we've been talking a lot about food sovereignty. And like Courtney mentioned, you know, when you think about this, you think of mostly it in a subsistence context. And, you know, really, I personally feel that there is no trust there, you know, coming from both sides. And there, you know, a million historical reasons for why there is no trust there. But I see that as what needs to be built, you know, to really set the foundation to fix this. I mean, if you just think about any relationship that you have, if you don't have trust in that relationship, what is it? You know, you can't call it a relationship. And so I think, you know, that like I said, it's a mutual distrust, and I think that trust needs to be built up, you know, mutually and collectively, and that looks different, you know, for a various number of reasons for all Indigenous people. And thanks again for holding this space for everybody today and all my fellow panelists. It's really nice to see everybody.
And I just wanted to say one thing about the co-management, even thinking about in protection of our lands and trying to protect our ways of life. There's a shift in the environmental and conservation systems, but just to, you know, for an example, the people of Kaktovik have to ask permission to use a four-wheeler to go hunting on their own lands, while every other community doesn't have to do that because of the protection, you know, federally protected refuge. And so what I envision in the future is having Indigenous communities be able to be not just, you know, trusted, but to lead what precautions, what needs to be done, and to not have those disempowerment laws, whether they're from a protection or a extractive industry kind of.
To close this out, I want to say some things in native languages from Alaska. Koyana Dailuji is Yupik for thank you all for coming. That's for our panelists and for everyone tuning in. Thank you, Anabasi, to Indigenous Environmental Network for letting us be on your live stream. Shout out to everyone that's been a panelist. Please follow these panelists. They're on Facebook, social media, emails at Sikanik with Sovereign Inupiat. I'm blanking it, but
For Living Arctic.
For Living Arctic, and SEAC, which is Southeast Alaska Conservation Council, and UTBB is United Tribes of Bristol Bay, and then Bernadette is with Gwich'in Steering Committee, and Eugene is with the Bering Sea Land Commission for Tribal. It's a long acronym that I forgot and I wasn't prepared for, but I will find it and post it on the Facebook, or it will be there. And yeah, big shout out to all your regions, and I really am holding all of our people, all of our relatives across Turtle Island in my prayers. And I want to say Edahoy Yani Halochtani in my language, Danaka. That means all of you take care of my relatives, Anabasi and Ganalchish, Koyanakbak, Koyana, Dogatin. We'll see you later. And thank you, Native Movement, my job, for letting me do this. Follow us, nativemovement.org, and Defend the Sacred Alaska, always Indigenous media. I'm just trying to drop them all. And if anyone wants to close out, we're on our last minute.
Yeah.
Doexit Nusasum and Demalgat Needsasum. Thank you all. It was really wonderful to see you all.
Koinak, everyone, for tuning in and listening, and thank you for the panelists. I learned a lot of information today as well. So.
Thank you so much for having me. I was a little nervous to get on the webinar. Usually I'm a teleconference queen, always on mute. But I appreciate the opportunity, and we would probably say joy enough. We're done. Thank you.
Kudat is how we say done. And Native Movement always says this little saying, decolonize, smash the patriarchy. It won't smash itself. This is one of our elders who said this little chant. Resist, exist, and wash your hands and don't fall in the river. So with that, be well, everyone.
Bihua, bye.